Jimmy is about to become a teacher at an all-girls high school. Hiragi, the homeroom teacher, asked him if he was ready to face what waited behind this door. Jimmy nodded with the confidence of a true teacher. When the other teachers heard that there would be a new teacher, a female teacher named Tenjuku appeared surprised. The whole room felt sorry for him. Jimmy is assigned to be in charge of a monster class. Students who have caused all the previous homeroom teachers to quit. They hoped he would last at least a week, and they started betting on how long Jimmy could last. Jimmy finally gets everyone's attention and introduces himself as the school's newest teacher. When they learned he had just graduated from college, they wished him all the best, because there seems to be no need to bet anymore. Tenjuku tried to say a few words of encouragement, but Jimmy went straight to his class, even though there are still 10 minutes left until the flag salute. He had absolutely no idea what he was about to face. Jimmy is assigned to be the homeroom teacher of Class 1A, known as Hell's Classroom. This all-girls school, although it looks like a garden full of flowers, is actually surrounded by thorny roses. Jimmy walked straight to the door of Class 1A. He looked at his watch, and he waited for the first bell to ring. Inside, the female students are making noise about the new homeroom teacher. They were curious as to how many teachers were sent here, but in the end, it didn't matter, because he would have given up anyway. Jimmy quietly entered the classroom and wrote his name on the board. He introduced himself as the new homeroom teacher of the class. Not a single student realized when he entered the classroom. His appearance and demeanor were so simple that it was like they were being taught by a bland cookie. Even the name Jimmy makes them think of boredom. When looking at his unremarkable appearance, the whole class stopped paying attention to him, and Jimmy struggles to control the chaos in class. Suddenly, a girl named Momo stood up and asked her classmates to calm down. But don't forget to call Jimmy Teacher Pale. After that, Momo suddenly asked Jimmy if he had ever done that with a girl. The whole class burst into mocking laughter. With Jimmy's appearance and behavior, they were sure that he had no experience in love. He exudes an aura like he's a lonely bookworm who's never had a girlfriend. Jimmy adjusted his glasses and calmly replied that it was true. "I will be single all my life, and I will be a teacher my whole life." Jimmy's straightforward response caused the whole class to whisper. He turned to ask Momo, "See if you have any other questions." Momo, impressed when she realized he remembered her name, but not surprising. After all, she is Momo, a super famous model working for the famous fashion magazine Heaven Teen. That's why Momo feels disgusted when faced with a strange teacher like Jimmy. She took out her classroom notebook, throw it straight in the trash, and encouraged him to quit his job. When Jimmy returned to the teacher's room, on his head is an eraser. Tenjuku was worried about his condition, quickly guessed that Momo was the culprit behind the bullying. She explained that Momo was originally a child actress, and thanks to her modeling work, she had developed a huge ego. Momo is always used to being pampered, so when she is angry, she is very difficult to deal with. There was once a teacher who tried to discipline her strictly, but Momo threatened to report him for pushing her down. As a result, the school was forced to fire that teacher. The story doesn't stop there. Momo quickly caused teachers to quit one after another, week after week. To comfort him, Tenjuku invited Jimmy out for a few drinks to forget the troubles that had just happened. But Jimmy refused, asserting that he was a true teacher and that a teacher's duty was to educate. He has little sympathy for anything not related to teaching. Jimmy thanked her for the handkerchief and left to go to the next class, on returning to Class 1A. "Let me teach physics." He not only teaches math, but is also in charge of physics. In fact, Jimmy holds teaching degrees in many different subjects. This means that he will be responsible for teaching many subjects for Class 1A. Momo then asked if that meant the entire class's scores would depend entirely on his assessment. Jimmy reassured him that he would be a fair and just teacher. He advised the class to study seriously if they don't want to repeat the same school year. Jimmy turned his back to start the lecture, but Momo stepped up from behind and sprayed apple juice on him. She pretended that her hand slipped. Momo hopes this action will make Jimmy angry and react out of control. However, Jimmy remained calm as if nothing had happened. He didn't mind getting wet, but strictly told Momo to meet him in the counseling room after class. He reminded that eating and drinking in class is not allowed. Momo is surprised by his reaction, and the situation gets worse when the whole class laughs at her for being punished for staying behind after class. The judgment of the court of public opinion is truly cruel. Momo had to stay after school, frustrated because all his tricks did not make Jimmy lose his temper. While in the consulting room, Momo received a call from her manager. The manager informed her that the TV show she was scheduled to participate in had been canceled. Momo silently accepted this news. But as soon as she hung up, she angrily threw the phone on the ground. But Momo has no intention of stopping, not at all. When Jimmy entered the consulting room, he realized Momo was planning to do something. Jimmy asked why she wasn't wearing a uniform, and Momo explains that since he hasn't reacted to anything, it's time for her to use all her tricks. She threatened that if she screamed that she was being attacked right now, everyone would quickly side with her, a prominent female student instead of an indifferent male teacher. Jimmy immediately understood what she was planning to do: force him to give up and submit his resignation. Jimmy's patience had reached its limit. If she wants to play bad, he will play bad. Suddenly, Jimmy took off his shirt. Momo reflexively covered her eyes, but Jimmy immediately turned around. He opened the door and shouted that he was being attacked. Momo angrily grabbed his collar and asked him what the hell he was doing. Not long after, Tenjuku and several other teachers arrived. Momo pretended to be innocent, but because Jimmy was the one who screamed for help first, the teachers were in an awkward position. However, the teachers couldn't help but take Momo's side. They warned Jimmy that this could lead to his resignation. Jimmy understands that. He knew that the incident would turn into a harassment claim, and although he denied it, "Your fingerprints will be sampled. Investigators will definitely find his fingerprints on Momo's zipper and clothes." Jimmy asked her if she was willing to go that far, but he also pointed out that her fingerprints were definitely on his collar as well. Momo realizes her plan has collapsed, and she was humiliated. Momo angrily rushed to attack Jimmy, forcing teachers to intervene. Momo angrily asked what right Jimmy had to talk to her like that. He responded that the previous teachers who were forced by her to resign must have had the same thoughts as him now. Tenjuku noticed Jimmy was bleeding, but he just shrugged and said it was part of the job. However, the situation has now become more serious because of his injury. Momo is facing not only suspension from school, but also the risk of a criminal record for assault. She knelt down and asked Jimmy for forgiveness. He is willing to do it on one condition: from now on, she must live an honest, complete, and meaningful student life. Tenjuku and the other teachers were surprised by Jimmy's gentle request, the complete opposite of what they expected. Momo asked why he let her go so easily. He replied that the goal of education is to nurture, and he succeeded in making her realize what she did was wrong, although it was the threat of criminal prosecution that forced her to apologize. Momo was touched by his kindness and tolerance, that this is her complete failure. Momo started crying, confessing that she had wanted to quit the entertainment industry for a long time. She admitted that she was only a second-rate model, and that the TV shows she participated in were constantly canceled. She apologized for taking out her anger on Jimmy. Jimmy interrupted, announcing that he was leaving because class had long ended. Tenjuku suggested that he stay to handle Momo, but he responded that this was not in his job description. The decision to quit the entertainment industry or not is entirely Momo's business. He is not her father or manager. Jimmy adjusted his glasses, reminding everyone that he would be single for life and a teacher for life. He then quickly left, saying goodbye to Tenjuku, Amari, and Akashi. Momo wiped her tears, and she said that Jimmy was obnoxious. However, Akashi realized that he had never introduced himself to Jimmy, making him wonder how Jimmy knew everyone's names. The fact that Jimmy possesses many teaching qualifications only makes him more mysterious. However, Jimmy's work is not over yet. The four students discuss Momo's sudden change and how they can no longer rely on her. They drew a big picture on the blackboard. They claimed that Momo, in a naked state, confessed to Jimmy and was rejected. Welcome to Class 1A. The next day, when the staff room started talking about the incident between Jimmy and Momo, suddenly Tenjuku entered the room, and she asked Jimmy to come to Class 1A immediately. There was an incident. When Jimmy went to class, Tenjuku explains why these problem students have never been dealt with. Their family has strong political ties and many important connections. These girls can even be seen as chosen ones. The four students are Tsubaki, daughter of a politician; Erika, daughter and heiress of the prestigious Tsutsuji family; Nizesa, champion and ace of the school volleyball team; Maki, a talented and excellent artist. On the outside, they appear to be perfect students. And anyone not in Class 1A is unaware of their true nature. Meanwhile, in class, when Momo saw the drawing on the blackboard, she angrily demands to know who did it. An anonymous student calmly said that he had been there since morning. Momo quickly realized who the culprit was. She quickly ran out of the classroom, and she crashed into four girls. They immediately ignored Momo. She confronts Tsubaki about the drawing, wondering why they did that. Momo thought that the four of them were her friends. Tsubaki bent down and called her a fool for thinking they were still friends. Tsubaki announced in front of the class that Momo tried to seduce Jimmy, and Maki spoke up to confirm this story. The whole class quickly turned their backs on Momo in a scary way. This was the final nail in the coffin. Tsubaki asks Momo to never talk to her again. Tenjiku and Jimmy finally arrived. Tenjiku immediately deleted the offensive picture on the board and asked someone to take responsibility. She also asked Jimmy to speak up, but he just said that she should leave because class was about to start. Tenjiku was kicked out of class in surprise, wondering if this is my fault. When first class begins, Momo discovers that someone has written on her textbook, telling her to go to hell. After class, Momo angrily threw the book at Jimmy. She blamed him for her situation. She showed him an article on her phone detailing her assault case. Momo has completely lost hope. She knew that as soon as her manager knew about this, her career would be over. Jimmy asked Momo if she was okay, but she began to get restless and worried. Jimmy promised to order a new textbook for her immediately, even though she didn't want to admit it. Momo realized that Jimmy occasionally showed genuine kindness and concern. When Momo asked Jimmy what she should do with her modeling career, he suddenly turned away and replied that it was not his problem. He emphasized that a teacher's duty is not to solve a student's career problems, but just to ensure her a comfortable school life. Momo angrily followed Jimmy, threatened that if she lost her job, he would lose his job too. A few female students witnessed Momo chasing Jimmy and lamented that she had ruined her career because of someone who looked so ordinary. In their eyes, Momo had fallen to the bottom. Meanwhile, the four girls went to the infirmary. They visited a female student with bloody bandages. Afterwards, Maki asked Tsubaki why she went to the infirmary. Tsubaki decided to tell a story. Previously, there was a new teacher who was enthusiastic about teaching. Not long after, he had to face two special students, a lovely but rebellious girl and an introverted girl who often skipped class. While the defiant girl bullied the teacher, the introverted girl was kind and understanding. They develop an emotional relationship with each other. But then, the defiant girl's plans finally succeeded. Teachers were forced to resign, and the introverted girl forever resents the unruly girl. The person who should have left was the unruly girl, not the teacher. Immediately after the teacher left school, he was quickly hospitalized for mental illness because of serious psychological damage. Others doubted that Momo's bullying could cause so much damage, but Tsubaki reveals that the person who actually caused it was not Momo. It was the girl in the infirmary named Banri who did that. Meanwhile, Momo continues to endure cruel bullying from her classmates. Her shoes were scuffed, her socks were soaked, and all her school materials were torn. When I happened to meet Jimmy, he just told her to quickly go to class because flag-raising time was about to start. Suddenly, they heard someone falling down the stairs. Tenjiku panicked immediately, but Jimmy calmly asked her to call an ambulance. He recognized the person who fell as Banri from Class 1A. Jimmy decided to go with her to the hospital to ensure safety. Tenjiku is surprised that Jimmy knows Banri's name. Banri has a reputation as a lazy girl who often skips school by staying in the infirmary. Even her classmates don't remember her name. But for Jimmy, knowing students' names is obvious. He is a teacher. Jimmy got into the ambulance, and they quickly left. After health check, Jimmy visits Banri to make sure she's okay. Banri suddenly stood up, hugged Jimmy tightly, and thanked him. She explained that her poor health made it almost impossible for her to attend class regularly. As a result, even her classmates didn't know her name, so she was happy that Jimmy remembered her name. Banri begged him not to leave her like the previous teachers. She placed all her hopes on him. Meanwhile, Momo continues to endure increasingly worse bullying. Malicious messages were scribbled on her desk. Her lunch was thrown in the trash. And nearly all textbooks were destroyed. During English class, the teacher scolded Momo for not bringing study materials, causing her to angrily call the teacher an old hag. After that, Momo angrily went to the locker room to prepare for gym class, while she still hasn't eaten anything. When she discovered her gym uniform was torn, she couldn't bear it any longer. She screamed at her friends, begging them to let her go. But they don't. Maki and Nazasa poured juice on her hair. Then they all laughed at her. They knew that Momo didn't have any clothes to change into. Momo couldn't believe that they would bully her to this extent. But then she remembered that she had done the same thing with Jimmy before, and now she is having to experience the drug that she caused. When she looked in her closet, she discovered a note with the words, "ugly." Jimmy approached the dressing room just as Momo was venting her anger. She accidentally bumped into him. Two teachers, Akashi and Sakaide, witnessed the entire incident. Momo swears that it's not what they think, and she tried to blame Jimmy as the one who attacked her, demanding that he be fired. But no one believes her. Momo's accusation would have been more convincing if she had stood up from Jimmy sooner. When Momo finally stood up, Jimmy gave her clean clothes to change into, along with a new pair of shoes and a few notebooks to replace the damaged ones. Momo asked why he did so much to help her. Jimmy just replied that because he was her teacher. Banri witnessed this entire touching scene, but her eyes were not warm at all. Banri stepped in front of Jimmy and suddenly pulled out a knife. The entire hallway was engulfed in fear and chaos. Only Jimmy was calm enough to walk straight towards Banri. Banri is recovering in a private hospital. She had been lonely for so long that she had forgotten the feeling of being treated kindly by others. Her classmates ignored her, and her parents didn't care. The only person who didn't do that was the teacher she loved. Hiragi scolded Jimmy for handling the situation himself without waiting for the authorities. If things don't go smoothly, the situation can get complicated quickly. However, she also acknowledged the work of Akashi and Sakaide, but both spoke up to defend Jimmy. They recounted how Jimmy calmly approached Banri, taking the knife from her before she could endanger anyone else. In the worst scenario, she could have stabbed herself. The group started discussing the times Banri caused the trouble for other teachers, but Jimmy suddenly announced that it was all just Banri's show. Even the fall down the stairs was fake. Everyone almost canceled Jimmy because of this insensitive comment, but he asserted that it would be obvious if Banri was seen for what she really is. And he could do that because he was her teacher. Jimmy then asked permission to leave. Note that business hours have ended. He was only paid for 8 hours of work, so he only worked 8 hours. Ignoring Jimmy's eccentricities, Amari and the other teachers were relieved when Banri was taken to the hospital for her own safety. But when no more problems arise, everything should be fine. However, things are not okay at all. Banri escaped from the hospital room that night, and she wandered the streets, looking for Jimmy. The next morning, Tenjuku burst into the teacher's room looking for Jimmy. Akashi and Seikei say he hasn't come yet. At exactly 8:30 a.m., Jimmy appeared. This is the worst time for you to be here. Tenjuku announced that Banri escaped from the hospital last night and is currently on the school roof. All the teachers immediately ran to the roof, scolding Jimmy as they ran for saying that Banri was just trying to scare him. Amari stayed in the schoolyard, trying to convince Banri to give up the idea of jumping, while Tenjuku and Momo ran straight to the roof. When Banri sees that Jimmy is not with them, she falls into deeper despair. She has become emotionally dependent on Jimmy and has spent all night looking for his house. Momo stepped forward, offering to listen to Banri's difficulties. She said that she now has more free time since retiring from modeling. Banri snapped, telling her to stop, saying she didn't need Momo's apology. But Momo still apologized. Momo admitted that she did a lot of wrong things. She used to think that all teachers were annoying and not worth her attention. Even now, she couldn't remember Mr. Suzuki's face. However, the fact that Banri still remembers his name clearly says it all. Suzuki must be a very important person to Banri. However, Momo cannot accept the way Banri shows her affection for her teacher. Cutting her hands and threatening to jump were almost similar to the type of harassment she did to others. This is why Banri has no friends, Momo said. Banri yelled at Momo to shut up and stop meddling in things that didn't concern her. But Momo responded that this was directly related to her. She calls Banri a nuisance because he always comes between her and Jimmy. Not stopping there, Momo also called Banri bird brain. This is clearly not an effective way to negotiate. Banri's hand slipped from the edge of the roof, and she began to fall. Momo rushed forward to pull her back. But at that moment, Jimmy arrived, exactly at 8:01 a.m. as usual. Jimmy jumped over the edge of the roof. He pulled Banri against him, and they both fell onto nearby tree branches. Thanks to clinging to a tree branch, they were lucky to survive. Banri hugged Jimmy tightly like a koala, refusing to let go. Amari sternly scolded Jimmy for risking his life to do so. However, Jimmy only asked Banri if she was injured anywhere. Even though she was still in a state of shock, Jimmy points out that Banri never really intended to commit suicide. He knew she was right-handed, so the cuts on her left hand were just big enough to bleed but not deep enough to cause lasting damage. Jimmy had been observing her very closely the entire time. He affirms that as long as he is a teacher, he will never abandon her. He told Banri that there was no need to do such things just to get his attention. Banri calmed down and smiled. Jimmy reminded her to respect his personal time after school, and he insisted that she wear her uniform properly. He also reminded her that she was going to be late for class. Banri wondered where the gentle teacher she once knew had gone. Meanwhile, Tenjuku couldn't help but be impressed with Jimmy's determination as he rushed straight to the roof to save Banri. The more she watched Jimmy work, the more curious she became. Who is Jimmy, really? Momo, while bathing at home, kept thinking about the incident related to Banri. She blamed herself for not being able to do anything and felt uncomfortable. When that same bland and mediocre teacher is the one taking action, this is so frustrating. The next day, Jimmy continued teaching as usual. He called Banri to the board to solve a math problem, and she happily complied. In the staff room, Sakaide, Akashi, Amari and Tenjuku discuss Banri starting school again. Not only that, Momo also regularly goes to class, even though she left the entertainment industry and suffered fierce attacks on social networks. Any normal person would choose to lock themselves in the house, but Momo still goes to school every day. There is no doubt that it is thanks to Jimmy's influence that these two special students are gradually changing. Banri has just truly returned to being a normal child. Tenjuku tells the other teachers that she feels something is off about Jimmy. As soon as she said, "Mention the devil appears." Jimmy walked into the teacher's room. The teachers immediately praised him for handling the problem students in class. Jimmy just took his teaching materials and quickly left, preparing for the next class. The three remaining teachers felt uncomfortable when Jimmy received so many compliments. When Jimmy returned to class, he met Tsubaki, Nazasa, Erika, and Maki coming down the stairs. Tsubaki congratulates him for his efforts and declares that he is a hero. She also commented that he was different from their previous teachers. He was truly willing to confront and fight. Tsubaki also looked surprised, saying that she never thought Banri could leave the infirmary. Jimmy narrowed his eyes. He realizes Tsubaki knows more than she admits. He started stating the facts. Banri didn't want to leave the infirmary because she was afraid of someone. And Jimmy knows very well why Banri hates Momo. It's because Momo pushed the teacher that Banri loved Mr. Suzuki to leave. When Banri sees Momo starting to bond more with the teachers, she fears that she is falling into a similar situation to before. If Jimmy is forced to resign, Banri will sink into despair, and Momo will be left without any allies. Erika steps up to accuse Jimmy. Makes it sound like this is Tsubaki's fault, but Jimmy calmly reminded her not to rush to conclusions. Even if there is someone behind the scenes pulling the strings, Banri's feelings for him are just a misunderstanding on her part. Jimmy adjusted his glasses and hoped that no further harm would come to either Momo or Banri. Suddenly, Nazasa threw a strong kick at Jimmy's chest. The kick sent him flying into the wall. Nazasa coldly tells Jimmy not to shove her one-sided ideals and morals in their faces again. She also said that he shouldn't go around school accusing others without proof. Jimmy remained calm and replied that he was just doing his job as a teacher. This answer made Nazasa even more upset. She stomps on his head, demanding he show proof that they were involved in the Momo and Banri incidents. Tenjuku saw Jimmy being stepped on and intervened. But Nazasa pretended that he was himself. Maki also intentionally stepped on Jimmy's glasses but pretended it was just an accident. Tsubaki and the group giggled as they left, leaving Tenjuku angry on Jimmy's behalf. Strangely enough, Jimmy still appeared to have no problem. You are a man with a mission, and he has no intention of giving up. He stood up and left school when work time was over. Despite Tenjuku's attempts to hold him back, as Jimmy left, Tenjuku picked up a small keychain he dropped, with the number 66 engraved on the keychain. Returning to the staff room, Tenjuku pondered this symbol, and she wondered what it meant or represented. Amari noticed that Tenjuku was still there, so she asked. Tenjuku showed her the keychain he had just picked up. Amari suggested that Tenjuku try looking online to learn about the keychain. She suggested that the symbols JA and the number 66 could be related to a certain school or a graduation badge. If she could find the name of the school, she could identify its owner. Tenjuku went to Google to find information about the keychain. Although she doesn't often interfere in other people's personal lives, she feels that Jimmy is not an ordinary teacher. After a while of searching, she found an article from 10 years ago about an incident that happened at Juan Private School. According to the article, this school once had a monster teacher who committed unacceptable actions against students. One of the teacher's symbols was the letter J. Tenjuku convinced himself that it couldn't possibly be Jimmy. However, as she continued digging into the case, she discovered something she shouldn't have known. Don't ask questions you don't want to know the answer to, she told herself. According to information, this school once believed that Class 1A was a gathering place for monsters, and if there is a teacher strong enough to face these monsters, It can only be someone with an extraordinary nature like them. Jimmy is a teacher who was once feared as a murderer. Tenjuku feels worried that Jimmy might also be a monster. When Jimmy caught Tenjuku reading an article about him, he just asked for the keychain back. Something very important to you. Tenjuku timidly handed the keychain back to him, and Jimmy turned away as if nothing had happened. She asked him if he was angry with her, but Jimmy only replied that he was not angry. He said he didn't care what others found out about him. Jimmy then left the staff room as quickly as he arrived, leaving Tenjuku to ponder. Tenjuku told herself that perhaps she had jumped to the wrong conclusion. There's no way anyone wouldn't care about something that serious. She decides that Jimmy had nothing to do with the incident at Chuan School. However, outside, Jimmy took out a bloody handkerchief with the letters JA embroidered on it. You are indeed involved in the incident at Juan. The next day, Jimmy asked Momo if she knew why he called her to the consulting room. Momo started giggling. She wrongly thought that Jimmy wanted to continue their private meeting well from the first. Jimmy told Momo that she came last in the most recent test. Momo almost screamed in horror. Hearing the noise, Tenjuku opened the door and immediately saw Momo's pathetic scores. Tenjuku understands that Onega School is very difficult, but getting a single score in many subjects is something she cannot ignore. However, Momo didn't care much. She only chose this school because she thought the uniforms here were cute. Tenjuku immediately pointed out that this could seriously affect her extracurricular activities, and her modeling career could also be in jeopardy. Hearing that, Momo's heart sank. Currently, she has no modeling contract, no friends, and now she doesn't have good grades. She asked Jimmy and Tenjuku if they really expect her to try harder. Jimmy replied seriously, that's right. He said she needed to take her studies seriously, unless she wanted to repeat the school year. Returning to the staff room, Tenjuku expressed his sympathy for Momo. She told Jimmy that before he arrived, Momo was actually a promising model, just waiting for her big break to truly step into the limelight. Tenjuku wondered if there was anything they could do to help Momo. Jimmy replied that they were teachers, and their only job is to make sure she doesn't repeat a grade. Tenjuku sighed, glancing at Jimmy. It seemed like he had no emotions at all. In a moment of slip of the tongue, she blurted out that the rumors about him being an emotionless machine were probably true. Then she quickly apologized to him. She told herself there was no way someone willing to risk his life to save a student jumping off the school roof could be heartless. Tenjuku heard that Jimmy really knew how to smile and asked him why he didn't smile a little more. Jimmy, with a completely serious expression, asked again, "Is smiling also part of a teacher's job?"